At 6:17 in the gray half-light of February, the forest east of Kumo held its breath beneath a temperature of -32°C. Arvo Lehtinen lay motionless beneath a shallow drift of wind-packed snow, his white camouflage stiff with ice. The barrel of his Mosin-Nagant rifle extended through a narrow slit he had carved before dawn. Angled across a frozen clearing measuring no more than 70 meters from tree line to tree line. He had been in position for 3 hours. He had not moved once. Somewhere beyond the opposite ridge, Soviet boots pressed through crusted snow in slow, deliberate rhythm. He could not see them yet, but the forest carried their presence, faint metal clinks, muffled voices forced low by caution, the distant cough of an engine refusing to start in the cold. They were searching in lines now, not advancing blindly. Hunting a thin crust of ice had formed along the edge of Arvo's eyelashes. He blinked carefully, once every few minutes, just enough to keep his vision clear. His fingers, wrapped in wool and leather, had long since lost sensation. Only pressure remained. Pressure and memory. He measured distance by habit, by the shape of trees, by the way sound folded in winter air. 3 days earlier, his company had withdrawn west under artillery fire that shattered the silence of the border forests. Soviet units had pushed forward with mortar, machine guns, and more men than the frozen ground could hide. Orders had been simple: delay, disrupt, survive if possible. Arvo had not withdrawn with the others. He had circled south through waist-deep powder, moving only at night, drinking melted snow, sleeping in shallow hollows scraped between roots. By the second night, he understood the pattern of Soviet movement. They were tightening the perimeter, not chasing ghosts. They knew a sniper remained somewhere inside the trees. Yesterday morning, a patrol had passed within 40 meters of his position. 4 soldiers, 1 officer. He had watched their breath plume white in the still air. He had not fired. Ammunition mattered now more than opportunity. 7 rounds remained in his pouch. A crow landed briefly on a branch above him, claws scraping bark loud as breaking glass in the frozen quiet. It tilted its head, studying the white shape below, then lifted into the pale sky. Nothing else moved. Minutes stretched. The light strengthened slightly, turning the snow from blue to dull silver. Shadows sharpened between the trees. Visibility improved, but so did danger. Searchlines worked best in daylight. The first Soviet soldier appeared at the far edge of the clearing at 6:41, stepping carefully around a fallen log half buried in snow. White camouflage cloak, rifle held low. Eyes scanning not the open ground, but the trees beyond. Disciplined, cold, made everyone careful. A second figure followed 5 meters behind. Then a third. They were not walking in formation. They were spacing themselves, forcing any hidden shooter to choose only one target. Someone had learned. Arvo slowed his breathing until each inhale lasted nearly 10 seconds. The movement of his chest beneath the snow became invisible. He aligned the front side post against the narrow space between 2 trunks where the lead soldier would pass. Wind, almost none. Distance, 68 meters. Elevation, flat. Bullet drop, negligible. His finger rested against the trigger without pressure. The lead soldier stopped suddenly, turned his head. Listening, Arvo did not blink. A branch creaked somewhere deeper in the forest. Not close. Not him. But the soldier's posture stiffened. The patrol shifted, rifles lifting slightly. Silence thickened. Seconds passed. Then the soldier moved again. Arvo exhaled halfway and held it there, the world narrowing to a thin, dark line of iron sights. He felt the slow beat of his pulse against the wood of the rifle stock, weighted between heartbeats. The shot broke the morning like a snapped thread sharp, contained, instantly swallowed by trees and snow. Recoil pressed gently into his shoulder. The lead soldier folded without sound, knees collapsing first, rifle sliding from numb fingers. Before the body touched the ground, Arvo had already shifted aim. Second shot, a fraction faster. The rear soldier jerked sideways, striking the trunk behind him, leaving a brief stain of dark red against white bark. The third man dropped flat and rolled toward cover, shouting hoarse words Arvo could not fully hear. Echoes tangled in the forest. Arvo did not fire again. 2 rounds gone. 5 remaining. Shouts spread outward through the trees, multiplying, overlapping. Snow burst from branches as men moved quickly now, discipline replaced by urgency. Somewhere to the east, a machine gun clattered blindly into the woods, rounds snapping through branches 30 meters wide of his position. He remained still. Stillness was survival. Movement was death. Minutes dragged past while the forest filled with tension. Soviet soldiers fanned outward, cautious again, slower this time. They had seen precision. They understood distance meant nothing. A mortar tube thumped once in the distance. The shell landed far beyond the clearing, throwing a dull column of snow into the air. Adjustment fire. Guessing, Arvo's cheek had frozen slightly to the rifle stock. When he shifted pressure by a single millimeter, skin pulled tight with a dull sting. He ignored it. Another patrol approached from the north, moving tree to tree. 4 men. One carried a submachine gun wrapped in cloth against the cold, their spacing tighter now. Fear did that. He tracked them quietly, but did not shoot. Not yet. Ammunition was time. Time was distance. Distance was life. The patrol paused near the fallen bodies in the clearing. One knelt. Another scanned the tree line directly toward Arvo's hidden hollow. For a moment, the soldier's gaze aligned perfectly with the narrow slit in the snow. Arvo did not breathe. After several seconds, the soldier turned away. Relief did not come. Only continued waiting. The sky brightened toward a pale, colorless morning. Cold deepened before noon, as it often did. Fingers stiffened further. Toes had long since disappeared into numbness that felt almost warm. Then a new sound reached him, low voices, firmer, controlled. Not searching, commanding. An officer stepped into the clearing from the eastern trees. Taller than the others, coat trimmed darker at the collar. 2 escorts followed close. He studied the bodies briefly, then the surrounding forest, calculating rather than reacting. Arvo watched carefully. Officers meant radios. Radios meant coordination. Coordination meant encirclement. The officer spoke, pointing toward the southern ridge. Soldiers began shifting position, forming a wider arc. They were closing the forest slowly, methodically, squeezing space until nowhere remained to hide. Arvo understood the pattern immediately. They were not hunting blindly anymore. They were hunting him. A faint tremor passed through his right hand, cold, exhaustion, or the slow weight of 3 sleepless nights. He tightened his grip until the movement stopped. Control returned in small degrees. Distance to the officer, 72 meters. Wind, still nothing. Remaining rounds, 5. If the encirclement tightened fully, escape would become impossible before nightfall. Movement in daylight across open snow meant certain death. Only disruption could create space. He shifted the rifle a single centimeter, aligning sights on the officer's chest. The man turned slightly, presenting only a narrow profile. Harder shot, smaller target. Arvo waited. One of the escorts stepped directly in front of the officer, blocking the line of fire. Seconds stretched. Muscles ached from stillness. Breath slowed further, almost stopping. The escort moved aside. Arvo exhaled. And then, from somewhere behind him, far too close, snow cracked under sudden weight. Not imagined, not distant. Real someone else was in the forest. Within 30 meters, moving carefully. Searching the rear, the encirclement had already closed. Arvo's finger remained on the trigger, sights fixed on the officer who could end the hunt with a single command. But the new sound behind him meant time had vanished. One shot forward might mean death from behind. He did not turn his head. He listened. Slow steps, pauses. The faint brush of cloth against bark. A soldier advancing alone, methodical, patient, certain the sniper was near. Distance shrinking. 25 meters, maybe less. The officer in the clearing raised his hand, preparing to signal something Arvo could not yet see. 2 directions, 1 decision, 5 rounds. No escape, once revealed. The forest held its frozen silence, waiting for the smallest movement to decide who would still be alive when the sun reached its highest, coldest point above the border. Arvo steadied the rifle between numb fingers and chose where the next second of history would fall. He did not turn toward the sound behind him. Turning meant movement. Movement meant detection. Detection meant seconds, no more than that, before the forest filled with gunfire from 2 directions at once. Instead, Arvo let the sound settle inside his awareness, the way winter silence always did, separating distance from direction, weight from intention. The soldier behind him was careful. Each step placed along the harder crust beside exposed roots. Not rushed, not afraid. A hunter who believed the prey was already cornered. In the clearing ahead, the Soviet officer's raised hand remained suspended in the pale morning light. Fingers stiff inside a dark glove. Around him, men waited for the signal that would tighten the ring another 10 meters, then another, until the white forest yielded whatever it was hiding. Arvo understood the geometry without seeing it. 30 meters behind, 70 ahead. 5 rounds, no second position. No nightfall yet to hide movement. Only a single fracture in time where one action might still unbalance the others. His heartbeat slowed until the pauses between pulses felt longer than the beats themselves. He let half a breath leave his lungs and held the emptiness there. The rifle's front sight rested against the officer's narrow profile, unmoving despite the tremor that lived somewhere deep inside cold-numbed muscle. Behind him, snow compressed again. Closer now, perhaps 20 meters. If the rear soldier saw even the outline of disturbed snow, a shout would follow. Then automatic fire. The officer would drop instinctively, and the forest would close forever. One shot would become none. Arvo shifted his thinking, not his body. The officer was not merely a target. He was the hinge holding the search together. Remove the hinge, and motion would fail. Confusion would widen space. Space could become survival. But the rear soldier was already too near. Another step, 15 meters. Arvo's finger tightened a fraction, then stopped. Not yet. Timing was distance measured in heartbeats. If he fired too soon, the man behind might still see the muzzle flash through drifting powder. Too late, and the officer's signal would fall. 10 meters. The forest seemed to contract, every tree leaning inward to witness the decision. Even the faint wind that had slept all morning remained absent, leaving the air clear and merciless. The officer began to lower his hand. Arvo pressed the trigger. The rifle cracked once, a flat, violent sound that shattered the stillness and returned as dull echoes between frozen trunks. Recoil pushed gently into bone. Through the sights, he saw the officer's body fold as if the strength had been removed from inside it, knees striking snow before the rest followed. The raised hand never completed its signal. In the same instant, Arvo rolled sideways into the shallow hollow he had carved hours before, dragging the rifle with him as snow collapsed inward to hide the movement. A burst of automatic fire erupted from behind. Bullets ripping through the space where his head had been less than a second earlier. Bark exploded from a nearby trunk, scattering dark splinters across white ground. He chambered another round by feel alone. Shouts filled the clearing, confused, overlapping, directionless. Without the officer's command, the encirclement hesitated. Some soldiers fired blindly toward the tree line. Others dropped beside the fallen body. No single voice replaced the one that had vanished. Arvo turned then, finally, bringing the rifle toward the rear. The Soviet soldier stood partially concealed behind a narrow pine, submachine gun raised, searching the drift where movement had disappeared. Only the man's shoulder and a slice of helmet showed between bark and snow. Distance, 12 meters. Too close for error. Arvo fired. The second shot sounded smaller inside the rising chaos, almost lost beneath machine gun bursts from the clearing. The soldier behind the tree collapsed without a cry, weapon falling silent before it struck the ground. 4 rounds gone. 3 remaining. He did not wait to confirm anything. Already he was moving, low and fast, sliding along the shallow depression that angled northwest toward denser forest. Snow soaked through wool at his knees and elbows. Cold air burned inside lungs, forced suddenly into motion after hours of stillness. Bullets snapped through branches behind him as someone glimpsed the disturbance. Not aimed, not precise. Fear firing into uncertainty. He reached the thicker trees and rose into a crouched run, weaving between trunks spaced barely 2 meters apart. Every step risked noise. Every second risked sight. But stillness was no longer survival. Now distance was. The forest deepened into shadow, where sunlight struggled through tangled branches. Sound changed, here muffled, contained. He angled downhill toward a frozen stream he had crossed during the night, knowing the ice would carry fewer tracks than open powder. Shouts continued behind him, but grew less certain. Without command, pursuit fractured into fragments. Some followed, some stayed. Confusion widened like cracks in lake ice. Arvo reached the stream bed and stepped onto the frozen surface, boots striking harder ground with a hollow tone that echoed faintly beneath the ice. He moved along it for 20 meters, then left at a sharp angle into untouched snow, breaking the line of pursuit. A trick learned from hunters long before this war. His breathing grew loud in his own ears. Each inhale cut sharp as broken glass. Exhaustion, held back for days by stillness and focus, began pressing inward from every direction. He slowed only when the forest swallowed all immediate sound of pursuit. Then he stopped beside a fallen spruce half buried in drift and listened. Nothing close. Only distant voices carried thin by cold air. No coordinated chase. No engines. The unit behind him had lost its center. He lowered himself carefully to one knee. Muscles trembled now that motion paused. When he looked at his hands, the skin around his knuckles had turned pale gray beneath torn wool. frostbite beginning. There was no time to consider it. 3 rounds remained, enough to delay again, not enough to fight. The sun climbed unseen behind high winter cloud, brightening the forest without warmth. Temperature would fall again by late afternoon. If he kept moving west, friendly lines might be reached by night. If direction held, if strength held, if no new patrols closed the distance first. He rose and continued. Hours passed in fragments of movement and listening, movement and stillness. The forest repeated itself endlessly peen, snow, shadow, silence, until distance lost meaning. Once he heard distant artillery far to the south, dull and slow, reminding him the war extended beyond this frozen pocket. Once a pair of ravens crossed overhead, wings beating heavy air. By mid-afternoon, clouds thickened and a fine dry snow began to fall, softening tracks almost as quickly as they formed. Good for escape, dangerous for navigation. Landmarks blurred into sameness. Arvo's steps shortened as fatigue deepened. Each lift of the boot required decision. Each breath demanded will. Hunger gnawed quietly beneath layers of cold. He had eaten the last of his ration the previous night. Still, he moved. Near dusk, the forest opened slightly along a low ridge where wind had swept snow thinner. From there, he saw faint shapes through trees far ahead, angular lines not made by nature. Dark against white, motionless. He lowered himself into shadow and studied them through narrowed eyes. Not Soviet. The spacing was wrong. No movement. No search pattern. Only abandoned timber frames from an old logging camp, empty since before the war. Shelter, perhaps. Or danger waiting unseen. He approached slowly, circling wide before closing the final distance. The cabins were broken, roofs half collapsed beneath snow. No tracks, no sound. Only wind whispering through splintered boards. Inside the least damaged structure, darkness gathered early. He cleared a space along the inner wall and sank down carefully, rifle across his lap. For the first time in 3 days, no immediate threat pressed against his skin. Silence returned. Real silence, heavy and complete. Only then did the trembling begin in earnest, moving through his body in waves he could not stop. Reaction delayed by survival. He closed his eyes briefly, but did not sleep. Sleep in this cold could mean never waking. Night settled fully, bringing deeper cold and a sky of hard, distant stars visible through gaps in the broken roof. Somewhere far behind, faint echoes of scattered gunfire drifted and faded. Directionless, meaningless now. The officer in the clearing lay where he had fallen. The encirclement that had nearly closed dissolved with him, command severed by a single unseen shot. By morning, the Soviet unit would withdraw to reorganize, reporting resistance larger than truth. Confusion would travel up chains of command as quietly as the bullet that caused it. Inside the ruined cabin, Arvo remained seated, conserving heat, measuring breath, waiting for enough strength to move again before dawn. He did not think of victory, only distance, only survival, only the next step west through endless snow. Hours later, when the eastern horizon finally paled with another bitter morning, he rose, slowly, joints stiff as frozen wood, and stepped back into the forest without leaving a word, a marker, or any sign that he had ever been there at all. Weeks afterward, reports would mention a delayed advance near Kumo, an officer lost, a patrol scattered by unseen fire. No name attached, no certainty, only absence where momentum had been expected. The war continued, vast and indifferent. But in one frozen forest, at 6:17 beneath a temperature of -32 degrees. A single decision had ended a battle no map would ever fully record.